What's up? I'm back. This is my third take on this podcast. From my friend Ben Leo Swatowski. He's from New Jersey. He's here to provide American insight. I've got my friend Connor. He's not providing any insight, but in case you wanted to watch this as a video rather than listen to it as a podcast, which is its intended format, I have gameplay of Super Smash Bros. Melee to fill you in with. Connor is Ymir in all the clips that you're seeing. Anyways, today we're talking about government, economy, war, terrorism. So there's power and authority. Power is the ability to exercise one's will upon another, regardless of whether or not they want that happening. And then there are three legitimate means of power, which are force, influence, and authority. Force is when you threaten or you intend to actually use coercion to impose your will on someone else. Influence is you exercising power on another by means of persuasion, and authority, which is the most legitimate power, is when someone who has power over another person is recognized isn't necessarily, no, it's just when they're recognized. So that's the president or a leader of a country, someone who has authority and has power. And Max Weber identified three types of authority. Traditional power, which is power that's passed on, which is for example by custom and accepted practice. Example would be Japan. For a while until I think 1850s when they had an emperor. I don't know what else would be considered traditional power. I suppose tribes could technically be considered traditional power, as you could say that they pass their leadership on to if they were to pass it to their sons or stuff like that, similar to Japan. Rational/legal authority, which is authority based on formally agreed upon rules, principles, and procedures made to be efficient at accomplishing goals. So that's laws and rules and stuff like that. I don't have any structured examples. And then charismatic power, which is power made real by a leader's emotions or their appeal to people. Then we got, so those are the three types of authorities. Ben, you got any other examples from those? Yeah. No. Then, and also feel free to jump in with any points at all. I'd love it. Then we got different economic systems, and economy kind of came because of the industrial society, which is when people started depending on mechanization to make goods and services. An example of this was how in 1850 Montreal's population was 50,000 people, and then essentially industrial society cultivates people because they need to abandon more not distant, but less populated areas, and instead go to factories and stuff like that to make wages, because that's the most efficient means of production at the time. And so Montreal went from 50,000 in 50 years to 300,000 people, which is a pretty big. It's 6 times. Um, then an economic system is a social institution through which goods and services are produced. So that's essentially capitalism or socialism. Um, Capitalism is an economic system in which there's a lot of economic. Sorry if I don't mean to bore the listeners with a repetition of words, but most of these are textbook definitions just because I want to make sure that everybody's prepared properly. Um, Capitalism is when the means of production are held in private hands. So, and there's like an incentive for profit, which is like the main reason that people are doing that, like they produce goods and sell goods is simply for profit. And it kind of emphasizes free competition, and it's pretty cool in theory, but it can lead to issues like monopolization. And then I don't know what are other issues of capitalism. Oh yeah. Yeah. Um, and it's better like now that the government like monitors systems, but like in previous free markets, the government didn't, and like they're essentially, and a good example of that I think was China. Um, like China originally was a communist state, and then as they switched over, they gave certain firms like more power. Um, but the issue led to that government needs to be there to monitor like safety and environmental standards, whereas in China they can get paid very little for like 6 day work weeks, and like suicide rate at factories are pretty high, and it's overall just like making the people who are leading the factories really rich, and then because they're having to put very little money into maintaining their conditions because they literally don't have to. Socialism is when it's another economic system, which is when the means and productions are equally distributed, and communism, which is like socialism but different, is the ideal type of socialism and economic system where essentially like distribution is always going to be equal, and everybody is considered to be like part owners of everything, and it makes it so that like the area or the state is a constant like cohesion, like a unit that works together. There's but shoot, I don't know, I can't read my own notes right here. It's kind of embarrassing. Mixed economy, which is a mix of capitalism and socialism. Oh my god, Connor's stream's lagging. Ah, boy's gone. R.I.P. if you're watching the footage. But mixed economy is an example with like where the government is part of a capitalism. So like police, like road, firemen, public schools, like stuff like that is an example of how like it's not a free market, but at the same time it's not communism. I don't know. I don't have any. What other stuff does the government regulate? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then there's another economic system, informal, which is underground, which is like it's a transfer of goods and service without reporting it to the government. So like when I walked my neighbor's dog Beans in the seventh grade, I was paid just in cash. So technically part of the informal underground economic system, but it's actually like gets you out of taxes, which is like pretty cool. but it's pretty bad for the government itself. Um, because it can't, for one thing, taxes can't happen, and then the system itself isn't like super reliable because it can't expand, because the whole point is that it's not really known. So when it like starts to gain profits, it isn't able to expand itself. Then, yeah, Ben, can you read this? Can you read what this says? Sorry about this. Yeah, something economies. I'm gonna go to the reading real quick to figure out what I'm meant to be saying here. I did my notes and I've done my readings. I just, I'm not great with my handwriting, and I guess, changing economies. That is what it says. Alright, changing economies. Some traits of that are deindustrialization. I don't know if you knew what this was, Ben, but it's just basically, actually you definitely did, you just didn't know it was. It's when technology replaces the need for labor, and it leads to other processes such as like offshoring and downsizing. So overall, it's like while it's like good for the companies, it's pretty bad. Then, because it can lead to unemployment, layoffs, familial damage, and like social damage when just the idea of being unemployed and like jobs being taken over because they relocate their labor to different areas, such as like Canada's presence in Mexico has been steadily like increasing throughout the years, whereas since like 2003, I think there's been more than like 600,000 layoffs within like the country itself. Let's go. Connor's back. Ben, give your insight into American deindustrialization. You live in the Rust Belt? Oh, that's neat. Damn, no, that's a really good example, and that's like perfect how deindustrialization. We moved away from need of that, and then factories shut down and towns just become dead. Can be pretty bad, but at the same time, it's I don't know. With everything, there's give and take. Deindustrialization means that there's more efficient like means to produce, so it's in a free market economy. I feel as if while, like, obviously, it's like not necessarily like the most ethical thing to do, because people lose their jobs. If the whole like purpose of a capitalist economy is that you get to make money, then for what reason like shouldn't they be? Kind of is how I feel. At the same time, though, I wouldn't really want to be laid off, so I'm against it. There are some ways to combat it, though. One specific one I had was microfinancing, which is when you lend. It's the lending of money to impoverished people, more so to help them out so that they can like work out of poverty. Which is something I didn't really know the term for, but it's really interesting. Next, the textbook talks about types of government. I can't read this either. But I'm just going to start listing them. Monarchy, which is when not necessarily a single power, but a familial power exists, such as Great Britain, the Netherlands. Actually, I don't know. Do the Dutch have a monarchy? I'm pretty sure they do. Yeah, I'm gonna guess with confidence that they have a monarchy. Then there's an oligarchy, which is when a few individuals are in power. A dictatorship, which is when there's one person in total power. With the dictatorship comes totalitarianism, which is a fear of or no, it's not a fear. It is when one person is in complete control of everything in the whatever they're leading or. Then there's democracy / representatism. Representatism. And then the textbook talks a bit about political behavior in Canada, such as democracy, to be clear, is when everybody takes part and there's voting, which is systems such as the United States, Canada, Australia, I think. Never mind. I think no, Australia is. Yeah, I don't know what else. I don't. Do you know other places with democracies? They're a monarchy. I believe so. I mean, the Queen's still in power, is she not? I mean, Parliament exists, which is democratic, but I believe. Oh, I know. Is it Sweden? I think. Then. For behavior in Canada, one issue is apathy in participation, which is there's not much voter turnout in Canada. There was an infographic on the textbook, right here, showing percent of turnout of registered voter at parliamentary elections, with Canada holding a strong 61%, which is pretty poor for a country with a high population. Damn, neat that it's government when the election is in the U.S. tomorrow. Then. Oh, and then another issue is race and gender, which is pretty simple. It's just that marginalized groups lack political strength, which is a classic and obsolete time, just white men, old white men in power, and women and any white person having less influence. Damn, if I'm just reading my notes, I feel poor about having, because I feel like it's hard to run a podcast if I'm just reading notes. Anyways, then there's power structure, which is the elite model, which is the idea that society is ruled by a small group of individuals which share political interests and economic interests, and that was proposed by Karl Marx, which led into his argument for communism, in which case nobody has complete power, and there's like, since there's not like a free market economy, there's nobody who is being put down lower than one another. A different model was made by Mills's Power Elite, which is a small group of military, industrial, and government leaders who control the United States. And that was his argument to begin. And I don't know. I think it's a reasonable argument to propose. Oh, let's go, Connor's back. When like the president has power, and like is sort of like in cahoots with other like people around him. A good example was that when the Bush administration was in power, the Republicans like led to a significant like those who are associated with his administration ended up having in my notes. You saw a significant increase when the war on terror began, in which Bush just essentially those in his administration invested in similar things that would profit from the war on terror, and as did it essentially just makes it so that people stay in power and make money and keep making power. Then, I'm not screen sharing so Ben can't see, but here was an example. Here was when they're talking about power. This was the models that Mills's model had. At the top is corporate rich executive branch and military leaders. Then the middle is interest group leaders, legislators, and local opinion leaders, and the bottom is unorganized, exploited masses. I'm in the U.S. an unorganized, exploited mass. But other than that... Oh, and then Domhoff had the idea of Domhoff, which he said that roles essentially were corporate communication, political information. I have no idea what this says. Oh! I remember. Domhoff, like, basically emphasized the role played by elites, and, like, those who are, like, of the higher class, including, here it is, corporate communications, political elites, formation organization leaders, essentially the social upper class, and rich white men. And then that was divided. Yeah, it's really hard for this to be a podcast. I'm trying to come up with questions, but I'm struggling. That was led by those. Domhoff's model can be broken up into the corporate conservatives and the liberal labor, which is the corporate conservatives is both parties, like Democrats and Republicans. And liberal labor is made of... That cannot be right. Oh, yeah. I don't know, man. It's hard to make this a podcast. I'm just, like... feeling hard. I feel like it's just me reading out my notes out loud. Alright, Connor had to go. Not Connor, Ben had to go, and also, like, the podcast format wasn't really working with two people, so my apologies so far for the notes on that. But now I'm just gonna be reading out my notes. Where was I? All right, Domhoff's. I don't know if it's pronounced Domhoff or like Domhoff, um, but he essentially based. Here, I have it here. Although the three groups overlap, they do not agree on certain policies. So the three groups of policy formation organizations, corporate communities, and um, the social upper class, basically they don't necessarily agree. The corporative conservative coalition has played mainly politics, and they support candidates through direct mail appeals. And a liberal labor coalition is based in unions, liberal churches, universities, and legal organizations. Local organizations. Then this led into the pluralist model, which is a society in which many groups have access to the government, so no one group dominates power, and many groups play a role in decisions, and it basically means that as a citizen you have more power for change. Some examples of this are like with like technology in recent elections. Actually, I don't have technology, for example. Unions are a good example where in the workforce, many people can like influence power. And the idea in a perfect like pluralist model, we would see that different people, like one person could headline, like let's say a construction worker would have the ability to oversee and like manage and command like what is going to happen with like making a building, but that same person will have a lot less power when it comes to like treasury or something like that. And so essentially it just means that everybody has a role, and no one group controls everything. Textbook then led into War and Peace, and when you're at War and Peace you have to look at globally, how and like why two nations are going to war with one another, nationally, which is like international politics, that could like how that's affected, and then micro, which is the social like consequences of war and stuff like that. That led into the other reading, which I'm going to start now, which was talking about war and terrorism. So war is defined as an organized armed violence aimed at a social group in pursuit of an objective. War originally was on smaller scales with like stuff like tribes and villages, because there wasn't much like technology. And then of course, like now, war is a larger scale. And another thing is that war unified and creates states, which organization of central government and government agencies, such as the military, police, and regulation agencies, because when people would go to war, like villages would go to war, they would win. One village would become another. And as like war continued, nations got bigger and bigger, and it essentially led to like, I believe, I remember seeing something. Oh, right, in 1000 BC, there were 600,000 like independent like groups, like associations, which led into less than 200 like politically like associated groups, and today, Industrialization leads to more destructive war, but at the same time, it also makes it so that people are less like prone to war, because I know the idea that if somebody has the means to like entirely wipe a city off the map, it's kind of startling, and you don't really want to go to war. A good example of this is the Cold War. U.S. and Russia are essentially having an arms race to see who has like the bigger weapon, and it really just it was everybody was showing that they had the means to destroy it, but nobody like wants to pull the trigger because of course it's like at that point you're essentially dooming yourself. Fun fact is the U.S. makes up almost 1/2 of the world's military spending. They contribute more than the next 32 in the list of military spending combined, which was pretty startling, seeing as I'm from, Nueva Jersey. Alright, in regards to war, these are like the different perspectives on it. The structural functionist perspective says it mainly focuses on the functions that war serves and suggests that it wouldn't exist without some positive outcome. War brings people into new groups, which was one example of it going from like 1,000 BC, 600,000 to now 200, less than 200 independent political groups, representing like countries and stuff. That is, it leads to social cohesion within economic and political cooperation. Basically, like when a nation goes to war, everybody wants to support the nation they're in, or most times people want to support the nation they're in, which means that there's more cooperation. And short-term structural functions say short-term it creates employment opportunities and that it stimulates the economy. And then another example is that war leads to inspiration, some of which can still be used like outside of war, which is called dual-use technology. So it's basically technology made for the purpose of war that can be applied and used in everyday civilian life, such as this thing called Slice that was mentioned in the textbook, which was basically made for means to like I believe it was an engine, or it was like a motor that helped with water and like helped boats to like move quicker, and it was used in like for fishing. And I don't have another good example to that. Oh yeah, I do. Nuclear fission led to nuclear power, which was like really good for us because it's a more sustainable means of energy than fossil fuels. Then the last bit for the structural functionist perspective was that social reform and shared loss are like a product of war. So when if a country gets like essentially you lose a war, you're able to look at yourself and then see the people around you who also lost, and it's sort of like it is a shared experience, like good or bad. The conflict perspective basically says that the roots of war are antagonism that emerge from two or more ethnic groups, countries, or regions within countries struggling for control or resources, or have different political, economic, or religious ideologies. War benefits the corporate, military, and political elites and doesn't do much for the masses, which are used more so as fodder. It helps developing corporations with contracts, though, however, because it like when the U.S. was at war with in the Iraq war. Oh, Connor's out there. U.S. after 9/11 made it so that essentially any like third party could pick up a contract and supply for them. So it was, and they guaranteed profits. So even if the like cost was originally going to be X and it ends up being a lot more, the government then just like covers it. So it's a good way to help with developing corporations. Then along with it, wars gain you raw materials. The military elite get prestige and employment, and the political elite gain power. And that's basically it for the the conflict perspective. Then the symbolic interactions perspective focuses on the meaning and definitions, on how meanings and definitions influence war, influence attributes and behaviors regarding conflict and war, more specifically. Attitudes and behavior develop are set to, symbolic interactionists say that these behaviors towards war develop really young, with things like Nerf guns existing as war, video games like Call of Duty, and pro-war speak, such as the war on drugs, and stuff like that, where war on crime, war on poverty, when war is associated with a positive light. That basically helps their perspective helps explain how military recruits and civilians get a mindset for war by defining it as acceptable and necessary. Then government officials essentially convince masses that war ensures peace, which of course makes it so people are willing to fight just to guarantee peace in the end and protect their families and stuff. And to legitimize war, the government essentially makes it so that killing in war is not considered murder. They rebrand war to make it positive, essentially. Missiles become peace heads, and the opposition, who are just humans, get derogatory slurs and names. I'm not gonna say. Make it so that you can dehumanize the enemy, and then it makes it so that civilians and people who are just now soldiers have less social conflict or less moral conflict than they would. Causes of war. Here we go, babe. Conflict over land and other natural resources such as water, land, or oil, which is primarily Middle East. Conflict over values and ideology. Racial and ethnic hostility. And then I don't know what the last one was, but good examples of conflict over land and other natural resources. The Middle East was projected, but it hasn't seen yet that water is going to become a more coveted natural resource, and I remember who was theorizing that it's going to be the primary cause for war in the Middle East in the coming years. Conflict over a good example of conflict over values and ideology is the Cold War, which was just communism and democracy, and Israel and Palestine, which I guess is that works. Racial, ethnic, and religious hostility, essentially is meaning that I don't know, it's what it says. It's cause for war can be as simple as somebody saying I don't like you based on something that doesn't really affect them. Then there's these things called constructivist explanations that emphasize the role of leaders of ethnic groups in stirring up hatred towards other, and it's essentially saying that external towards another group, the reasoning behind racial and ethnic and religious hostility is the constructivist explanation. Is their idea of what happens is leaders stir up and then get the other people angry. The primordial explanations emphasize ancient hatred and existence rooted deeply in psychological or cultural differences between groups involving grievances and such. 659. I don't know what there's this no longer has to do with racial and ethnic hostility, but I'm not really sure how to transition because the textbook just does it. But there's a keyword was retribalization, which was when groups seek solace in extended family of ethnic groups with one another, which is something that in a way does relate to the religious and racial ethnic hostility cause of war. Then beyond causes of war, we go to defense. We move to defense against hostile attacks. There's this idea of a security dilemma, which is a characteristic of the interaction state system that gives rise to unstable relations between states, which the concept is as state A was to secure borders, and its behavior may decrease other security because they're feeling and then as a result of that, when if state A was to secure borders, expand, etc., then other nations in turn also feel a need to decrease A's security, which is an example was when Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France were quick to react and declare that they weren't going to go against Germany, or that they were against Germany, and in part out of defense in Poland. A lot of it, if they had no fear that they would be invaded, it would be less of a situation. So it's doing to protect themselves, and in turn Germany feels more threatened. And another example was in World War I. Germany reacted to Russia, they felt threatened by Russia, so they preemptively react to them. Oh wait, no, I think this is still causes of war. My bad. Revolutions and civil wars, another cause of war. Pretty commonly known. If somebody has a conflicting view with the group, the leader of whatever country or group they're a part of, it can lead to a civil war or revolution. Good example would be United States Civil War. I don't have any other examples of civil wars off the top of my head because I'm not that educated. A nationalism is another cause of war, which is basically just war to maintain national pride. A good example of this was Hitler feeling that Germany after World War I was being treated very poorly in comparison to other World War I losers. And as a result, rallied Germany to attack the rest of the world. But that's war. Those are the causes of war. And now we're going to talk about terrorism in part 5. I think this is 4. This is the 4th part. Terrorism is the premeditated use or threatened use of violence against civilians by an individual or a group to gain a political or social objective. Different types of terrorism are transnational and international and domestic. Transnational is terrorism where an act in one country involves victims, targets, institutions, civilians of another country. An example of this was 1988, the Pan Am Flight 103 over Scotland, when it was just they bombed an airplane. Many people were killed. And 9/11, good example too. Domestic / insurgent terrorism is terrorism within one's country. An example of that could be ISIS, essentially. Yeah, ISIS is a good example of terrorism within one's country. The roots of terrorism were said to have been... There was a conference one year when a bunch of people came together. It was a political conference, and they came up with this list of the roots of terrorism. It's not super long, but it works. Failed / weak state without control over the terrorist party. Rapid modernization. Extreme ideologies. And could be religious, could be otherwise based. A history of political violence, civil wars, or revolutions within the country, which essentially leads to it being less stable and more prone and accessible to these civil wars. Repression of the people from a foreign entity can lead to terrorism, such as the U.S.'s presence in Afghanistan. Racial, ethnic discrimination, and I swear the textbook did not have an explanation for this. I looked for it, but the last cause was a charismatic leader. And I don't have any examples off the top of my head of a charismatic leader leading to terrorism, but it is a cause. Sorry, I lost my place in the book. Oh, the social steps to terrorism are, or to getting to terrorism and extremism, is when there's context, comparison, allocation, and reaction. So, which sounds silly, but it's all in regards to an issue. So context could be that one group is being treated poorly in whatever country you're in, and you're saying that's not right. Then it goes to that's not fair, which is when you can see that another group is not being treated as, not all groups are being treated the same poorness that this group is. Then you allocate blame, which is as simple as saying that it's your fault, and then from there you react and dehumanize, which is when people just react and dehumanize. So it goes simple, not right, that's not fair, it's your fault, and you are evil. Then the textbook included some U.S. responses to terrorism. Some poor ones were the USA Patriot Act, which is when after 9/11, I think it was only a couple days after, they passed the USA Patriot Act, which led to the U.S. monitoring like all of their citizens and many more people's like computers and like being able to access them. And then that like was Edward Snowden, who like uncovered that and kind of was a whistleblower against that. And things like Guantanamo Bay, where terrorists were kept in inhumane conditions, and in turn it only like reactions such as this only can lead to like more issues, because when pictures were released of Guantanamo's conditions, billboards were made in Afghanistan, and I don't know if it was Iraq too, of like these pictures threatening the United States, because they're treating their people poorly. Then, essentially, combating terrorism can be a difficult ordeal, because of like modern day tactics, such as like there's the internet, which is a good way for groups to like really easily like form globalization, when the fact that like everybody has access everywhere. And guerrilla warfare was a good example, which is warfare in which organized groups oppose a domestic or foreign group, and they essentially use camouflage and hide to then execute sneak attacks and such. So it's like sitting in tunnels and stuff to then wait and attack a group. And good way I like to remember it is I wouldn't see a gorilla in a jungle. And even though it's spelled differently, to be clear, I do know that. I don't think it's a nice way to remember it. Just blending in and causes issues. And another issue with terrorism is weapons of mass destruction, chemical bioweapons or nuclear weapons, which are weapons of mass destruction that can very quickly and easily kill like a large group of people. Then here's some social problems associated with conflict, war, and terrorism. Death and disability. War can lead to people dying and disability. And for that, it depletes labor and creates orphans, and it's a burden to the taxpayers because they have to pay for like means for the people who were injured in wars. Rape, forced prostitution, and displacement of women and children is another issue, a social problem of war. Even though the Geneva Convention said that, like, declared that you cannot, that rape is against it, still goes on a lot. And then for that, when countries are being invaded and such, it makes it so that women and children often have to relocate. Another thing is that children can get involved in the warfare, while it wasn't proven, or while it wasn't like shown statistics. The UN estimates that there are around 300,000 child soldiers today, and the country, 9 out of the 10 countries with the highest mortality rates of like under 5-year-olds are due to child soldiers. Then there's like social psychological costs, depression, anxiety, and fear of guerrilla warfare, which like requires like constant vigilance, are like often causes of war. PTSD can occur, post traumatic stress disorder, which is when somebody can have flashbacks and like panic attacks in result of having had a experience that has taken a toll on them psychologically. Another issue is that it costs a lot of money to finance war, which is why like it can cost that. And even in that, if you lose, your country is just like out so much money, and they've just like fought a war to lose. Then finally, it costs environment. It costs environment. Sorry. A good example is like in Vietnam, after 13 tons of it might have been 13 million tons of bombs going off. There were 25 million craters, which existed, just destroying like the environment around them. Then Gulf War was another good example. Oh, yeah, when there were 650 oil wells that were burned by, I believe, ISIS. And for 8 months, there were clouds that were like noxious and filled with oil over like the deserts. And those are all the social problems that were listed in association with war. Now we're going to talk about, to wrap up, global peace. For one thing, redistribution. This is how we get to global peace, by the way. Redistribution of economic resources. The rich versus poor has like been a big issue, and it makes it so that there's not much power in the poor people, and they end up being like soldiers. And just Funk said that to lower population would therefore increase like economic status of everybody. So a good idea could be just controlling population. United Nations is a good example of how to get to global peace, seeing as each country isn't made to be one specific, or each country still is represented, but at the same time, like they are able to talk with one another. Use global governance, which is unlikely, but it would be helping. It's basically just like everyone coming together. Then the textbook talks about mediation and arbitration. Mediation being unbiased help. So a mediator's job isn't to impose a solution, it's more so to help everybody like reach one by being in the conflict and like regulating what's going on. Good way to oppose war, talk things out. And then there's also arbitration. An arbiter's job is they hear both sides, and both parties, before like presenting their cases, agree that they'll come to whatever they'll agree with whatever solution an arbiter comes to. Another good way to avoid war. But the only issue is that with that is that it's just tough. I don't know. I was thinking about it. This isn't a textbook. Seeing as this is a podcast, I would like to share my own thoughts. I don't know. It's hard to assign an arbiter, right? Because if no matter what, it's like really hard to get an unbiased arbiter. I suppose you could just have a bunch, but then it's like hard to like specify qualities. If someone's meant to like make a decision based on that make a decision that would, if they weren't there, have led to a war, is like a lot of pressure, first of all. And then people could make arguments against arbiters, such as like innate inequalities like skin color, religion. If there, it doesn't. It's just like it's hard to think of, but it's something that needs to be worked towards. Another solution is disarmament. Also really hard, but pretty much what it says. If we were to disarm everybody, there wouldn't be war because people wouldn't have means to fight. And then this wasn't listed as a means of peace, but small arms were a big issue, because the idea that like civilians could not have arms makes it, and that they are so common, makes it hard for disarmament, because even if you were to get rid of a military, there's so many guns that are in existence already in like countries. Well, of course I'm gonna say the U.S. all the time because I'm from there and it's a prevalent issue, but so many people own arms in the U.S. Like I could walk down my street and I would guarantee that like one or two of my neighbors probably owns a gun, which is a kind of scary concept. If for one thing, I mean, no, it just is. It is scary. Understanding clash of civilization hypothesis, which basically was the idea that conflict based on social... It's a hypothesis that said that conflict based on social class and economic issues has now shifted to religious and cultural groups, more so than social class and economic issues. And that's those are my notes to cover the reading and the lecture, which all in all I enjoyed it. I don't know if this is considered a podcast. I tried to be creative with it, have Ben on, but as I was going, it's hard to... I couldn't find ways to deliver information without like at the same time imposing it onto him, because like feels like we can't have a conversation necessarily if I'm having to explain. Otherwise, though, honestly, I enjoy talking a lot more than I do writing, which is why, again, if you're watching the video rather than listening, you'll see, but my handwriting is absolute, like, garbage, which is making it hard and some of the notes for me to recount, because it was a long reading, albeit for this week. Other than that, gosh, I've been enjoying social problems. It's my only, like, this, or not my only, I did, but I just don't happen to go to your office hours. But, like, it's just nice to have an individual chat. Or unless a TA is grading this, which would be unfortunate. But overall, I really like the class. I originally, to be honest, took it as a fourth course. I needed a fourth course to be considered a full-time student, and I was like, I wanted to take some psychology course, but intro to psych was already taken. I'd taken it in high school, mind you, though, so like it's kind of cheating out. But then social problems available, and I was like, wow, social problems? I knew what it would be about, but I took it because, like, while of course I'm interested in material, I thought it'd be really funny to be able to say to someone, like, they ask to make plans and they say, oh, I can't, I've got social problems, like, in reference to me having the class, of course, but then our class times are 8:30, so it's not really an issue. Anyways, I have been enjoying the readings. My paper was long and I didn't like it at some points, but overall I'm pretty happy with my work, and it was interesting to learn about, and I was interested in my topic. So thank you for the class so far, and with that, I guess just the end of my podcast. Bye.